CS Instant Coffee. Do more, wait less. CS Instant Coffee. And you can find them at csinstant.coffee.
Hi, I'm Christina from Wild Raven Endurance Coaching. I work with athletes of all levels, from hikers to triathletes, helping you reach your goals with personalized guidance. With years of experience hiking, mountain biking, and trail running across New England, I also have a deep knowledge of the New Hampshire 4,000 footers and the surrounding trails. Whether you're a beginner hiker or a seasoned athlete, I'll guide you towards your goals, reducing injury risk and improving your performance through smart, tailored coaching. Are you looking to transition from hiking to mountain running? I'm here to make that journey easier too. My approach combines strength training, mindfulness, and life balance on and off the trail. Let me help you find more joy in your sport while getting stronger and healthier along the way. Visit www.coaching.christinafolsick.com and start your adventure today.
Broadcasting from the Woodpeckers studio in the great state of New Hampshire, welcome to the Sounds Like a Search and Rescue podcast, where we discuss all things related to hiking and search and rescue in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Here are your hosts, Mike and Stump.
Working overtime tonight.
Yes, sir.
Part 2 with Ty. Thanks for coming back.
Glad to be back. Thank you.
So where are we now?
So we are on episode 178, part 2 with Ty, talking about the Lions of Winter.
That's right. Only one more episode before the end of the year for us.
Yeah. Hey, what made you choose that title?
It has a dual meaning. I think I looked at the climbers from back in that generation. They were bold. They were continuously trying to get better, and labeled that young lions. And then obviously the tragedy that befell Albert occurred on Lionhead, and that's where the Lions of Winter came in.
Makes sense. Did you have any other alternative titles?
No, I came to that title really, really early in the process.
Yeah. Have you had any problems with titles before in any of your books?
No. Yeah. Those they become pretty clear. I think
just come to you
as the research unfolds.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So, because I would imagine that typically, like as you're writing, it becomes obvious.
Yeah. It did. It definitely did in this case sooner rather than later.
Awesome. So Stomp, I guess we left off with we had done a recap of the story of the rescue of Hugh, Herr, and Jeff Batzer, and then we had talked a little bit about Albert Dow, who unfortunately had lost his life in this 4-day rescue event. But the way we left things was that Hugh and Jeff had made their way up Huntington Ravine. They had decided that they were going to continue on to Summit Mount Washington. The weather conditions were pretty brutal that day, so they got turned around. Unbeknownst to them, they thought they were getting back into Huntington. They ended up into the Great Gulf. They somehow made their way down near Chandler Brook and Wamsuta area and ended up on Saturday night on the Great Gulf Trail.
The west branch of the Peabody?
West branch of the Peabody.
Yeah, which is probably, so if you are familiar with the area, you come up the Great Gulf Trail from the trailhead, you cross over Madison Gulf, and then if you go forward another mile and a half, you get up to the intersection of Wamsuta and Chandler Brook. You're deep right in the middle of the Great Gulf at that point, so it's a pretty flattish area there, and that's where the snow collects. So they're basically looking at no snowshoes, no gear, and they've got to make their way.
No shelter.
Yeah, and no sense of where they should go either.
Right.
So it's ugly. But at that point, Matt Pierce at the Harvard Cabin had interacted with them. He had a small group of climbers there, so he knew pretty quickly that they're not coming back was a bad sign.
Right. And
So-
he started making notifications.
Yeah. So how does that all work back in 1982 when we don't have satellite communication or anything?
So he radioed down. He had a base radio at Harvard Cabin. He radioed down to Pinkham, and then Pinkham had staff night watch that were there for this kind of thing, but they would just general caretaking overnight of the grounds because they would often have people obviously staying there. But then phone calls are made to New Hampshire Fish and Game, United States Forest Service, Mountain Rescue Service.
Is the people that are doing those phone calls? I'm assuming it's likely the folks that are at Pinkham Notch
Yes.
are coordinating.
Yep, 2 people were doing it.
Got it. And then at what point does the Forest Service get involved in that?
They got notified that night, and then they responded the next morning.
The next morning.
Yep.
And then the word gets out to the rescue teams, like,
Right.
hey, we probably got to get out there and take a look.
Yep.
Now, what was Matt doing on Saturday night at that point?
On Saturday night, he was just, I would say he was sitting in the cabin, trying to stay busy, waiting for the door to open and for Jeff and Hugh to walk in. Obviously, that did not happen. But they also, it's not like people are up late. I mean, Harvard Cabin back then probably didn't have some of the amenities that they have today. He would let the fire kind of draw down on purpose toward the end of the night just to encourage people to climb the loft and get into their sleeping bags. So not a lot to do there. Dark, short winter's night, gets dark early.
Yeah, and that Sunday, who were some of the key players involved in the rescue or the organization on Sunday morning?
Sunday morning was Mountain Rescue Service was sent up the auto road in the Thiokol, and their intent was to disembark at probably the 7-mile mark, and then they were going to take Huntington Ravine Trail down to the rim. And their intent was to establish an anchor at the top of Odell and send a team member or two down in to see if they had been hung up in the gullies, because as I learned in my research, that had happened before in 1979. 2 climbers had attempted to climb Odell and ended up in the gully in trouble. So that wasn't able to happen because the weather was so bad above tree line. They got off their Thiokol at the 5-mile mark, tried to get up to where they had originally intended to go, and I think at probably just before 6 mile they got driven back down the mountain. A few Mountain Rescue Service, Forest Service, and AMC folks went into Huntington Ravine, not to climb the gullies, but to search the floor and the fan, because again, it's not uncommon to get avalanched or fall out of the gullies and end up on the fan. And so they were checking the gullies themselves visually and without climbing up them.
It took them quite a long time to get to the point where they felt like they had cleared the Huntington Ravine and all those routes.
Yeah, and they left, and then there was another team on Sunday of AMC, team of 5 that ascended Lionhead, but they were not able to clear the gullies, and certainly not Odell Gully on Sunday. 2 climbers from Harvard Cabin on Sunday morning got up really early, went to Odell, started to climb it. Misha Kirk was already in the ravine because he headed up there about 4 a.m. on foot. They didn't see each other. That's how bad the weather was. And they got a pitch up Odell, and they just felt there was just too much risk of avalanche because, again, the winds had shifted from south to west overnight, and the eastern aspects of Mount Washington, which includes Huntington, Tuckerman, Raymond, were loading overnight. So they made the the decision to turn and descend.
Now, Misha Kirk, you had the good fortune of being able to read his journal and get his perspective. He recorded these pretty close to the real time of when they happened. Can you talk a little bit about him and what was he like as a person, and what was his impression of the events?
So Misha was he arrived at Pinkham after being discharged from the Army. He was a Green Beret with 10th Group, which at the time 10th Group was based out of Fort Devens in Massachusetts. They're now based in Colorado. He was a light weapons specialist. He was a medic, and he was a badass. And he arrived here. He was strong climbing skills, integrated well into the AMC culture, and at the same time was, as you can imagine, structured, driven, had that kind of command and control aura about him during emergencies, during rescues, and sometimes, and talking with his partner, she's very forthcoming about this, which is why I was comfortable sharing it. But, sometimes that approach would rub the climbing community the wrong way. So there were times where there was a little bit of tension between, that military approach and the very much more laid back approach of as you might imagine, of a climber or outdoor person.
And I think you need a balance of perspectives, probably.
Yep.
So it's probably a healthy thing to have that push and pull, because you're right. I think that, I don't know, hikers even, I don't know a lot about climbers, but my impression is that, they can be pretty loosey-goosey about things, and you need some discipline.
Yeah. And I don't want to generalize the climbing community, because I climb. So I can't say everybody's the same, but you could tell just through research and talking with people, people really, really liked and respected Misha. And then there were a few people who, just felt like maybe a bit overbearing, but during emergencies. But that's how he was. That's what you're trained for.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a Green Beret. I get it. And a medic.
Yeah, exactly. So that Sunday, they're not having a lot of luck.
No.
They're trying to clear and their focus is almost 100% on Huntington and trying to clear that area. They're not thinking at all that they went up to the summit, and they have no idea that they're actually in the Great Gulf.
No, they had no idea they continued to the summit. They anticipated, again, they thought, okay, had they gotten hurt in a gully, were they avalanched out of a gully? Might they have ended up in Raymond Cataract? Are they in trouble in the Alpine Garden? Because we know that second climbing party that was out the same day Jeff and Hugh were, they basically got pinned in Alpine Garden and had to crawl to escape hatch. And that wasn't long after Hugh and Jeff topped out. So no, they didn't know they went to the summit. And climbers from Huntington Ravine who had run into trouble had never ended up in Great Gulf before. It hadn't happened before, and it hasn't happened since. That's something that just doesn't and didn't happen.
And what was Albert doing during the search on Sunday?
Albert was on the auto road with the team that was what was going to happen is, once Mountain Rescue Service arrived at the rim of Odell in Huntington, a part of that team was going to break off, because there was 10 or 11 of them, was going to break off and go across the garden and descend Lionhead. And you had that other team that was ascending Lionhead and was going to come across the garden. So what they were trying to do is cover as much acreage as they could. And Albert was his assignment was to get to the rim of Huntington, and then, along with some other teammates, go across Alpine Garden and descend Lionhead. But ultimately that just didn't happen. They were not able to get high up onto the mountain at all.
Yeah. And the team, so they weren't successful in locating them on Sunday. So, was there any question in any of the team members' minds about getting back out there on Monday at that point? No,
I think there was some frustration on Sunday afternoon coming back to Pinkham that, where are these guys? Usually there's some sign that they might be somewhere, and there just wasn't. And again, you have you have these climbers that are very acclimated in really, really bad weather, but they couldn't get anywhere that they really wanted to go. And again, Odell went unsearched.
Can we go back to what Jeff and Hugh are going through Saturday night? They bought them out at Chandler. They didn't have headlamps, right? Is that what that stopped them in their tracks?
Yeah.
And how deep is the snow? What's the temperature doing?
So from the moment they got toward the floor of the ravine, and again they thought they were in Central, that they had descended Central Gully and were in the floor of Huntington, and then they're like, well, maybe we went too far over, and now we're in Tuckerman. So they're really disoriented. But when they got to the floor of the ravine and they started to link up with the west branch of the Peabody, the snow was what was shin deep on the plunge step, is now at their knee, thigh, waist, chest, and it would fluctuate between chest high and waist high deep snow. And over the course of this just busting trail along the West Branch, you have heavy scrub back there toward the back of Great Gulf. So they're trying to work through that. They have to go around it. They're afraid of crossing the river because they're afraid they're going to fall in. Occasionally they're using blowdowns to cross the river. And there are 2 occasions on Saturday when Hugh does fall in the water, the second time of which, Jeff had to essentially help him out. So Hugh got wet quickly and was unable to change his clothes.
Yeah, so they're in deep trouble, but
big time.
Luckily, the strength of young men is something that you can't discount in these situations. But that environment, I haven't been in the Great Gulf in the winter out past. I think I went up Osgood one time, so I did the lower part, but I haven't gone across Madison Gulf up into that area. I've been there many times in the summer, but I can't imagine trying to make my way through there. I mean, it does make sense that they were able to sort of stick by the Peabody River and come through, but it's just a very narrow trail there, and it's not obvious in the winter when there's snow out there. So I could see why they would be attracted to go in and out of the river, because that's really the only direction they could go.
Yeah, they were really limited on where they could move, snow depth and just vegetation.
Yeah. So as this is going on, so they are making their even with all this said, they are making their way in the right direction and heading down the Great Gulf Trail. But at the same time, there's a couple of hikers that have arrived at Pinkham Notch.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting dynamic in the book because, we talk about the fast and light. Then you've got these 2 hikers that show up, and they're like the stomps. Super heavy and slow. Right. Like so slow that they, from Pinkham Notch
Wait a minute. Did you say stomp?
I said, yeah, stomp, like stomp.
Heavy and slow.
Yes. Yeah. Heavy and slow gear, not your body. So, but so these 2 hikers, they're setting off, and Old Jackson, I think from Pinkham Notch to Old Jackson, the intersection to get to the auto road, I've hiked this many times. I think it's maybe about 1.5 miles. And they made their way a little past, this section. I think that's called Bald Spur is a nice little viewpoint, right?
Yeah. They had
Lowe's? Lowe's. Yeah. Lowe's. Yeah.
So they, I want to make sure I get this correct. They arrived, Saturday, I think Saturday night, and they ended up on the Sherby, and they didn't end up on Old Jackson. They camped out. It's like blizzard-like conditions.
So the Sherby's they made it about 5 feet from the parking lot.
Yeah, it was a thing. And I actually met one of them the other night in person at Gibson's. He had driven up from Massachusetts. I'd only interviewed him. It was awesome.
That's cool
to spend, and I got to introduce him to Albert's sister, and it was just a really neat moment.
Amazing.
So they were slow going. So then on Sunday, they're getting up late. They're moving at such a slow pace. Yeah. And they still beat themselves up about that today.
Right.
In a joking manner, but they actually encounter Misha Kirk, who is coming out of Hermit. He's coming down the Tux Trail, and he gets them reoriented back onto Old Jackson. So it's just, and I think it was just remarkable to talk to them about that encounter with Misha, and then to be reading Misha's encounter with them in his journal. It was just it was just a gift.
Yeah, and it's so funny because you can't just go on your phone and see like, you go on see social media sites and say, there's an active rescue going on. Like they kind of knew from Misha that something was going on, but they didn't know the details.
Yeah, Misha didn't say a word to them about it. They did encounter a woman who somewhere along the trail, they're not sure where, but who was really distraught that there were 2 climbers missing.
Okay, so that's where they got the tip off. But so they're making their way up Old Jackson. So Old Jackson crosses the auto road and then enters the Great Gulf, and you can follow that it connects with Madison Gulf Trail, and it's a nice winter hike. It's a flat.
It's part of the
hike.
Part of the AT.
Yes, yeah. So they're making their way. The rescue team is striking out on Sunday. And then can you talk about Sunday night? What was Sunday night like for Hugh and Jeff?
Yeah, so Sunday night, the backpackers that we were just talking about, they camp on Old Jackson.
Yep.
And Hugh and Jeff on Sunday night, so this is night 2.
Yeah.
Night 1, they had found a bivouac under a boulder. It took them some time. They had tested a couple of different spots. It didn't work out. They had done, you talk primitive skills, and this goes back to, I really believe it goes back to that resiliency and self-reliance that their parents instilled in them at a young age, getting them out camping. But they knew they had the wherewithal to cut off boughs of spruce and fir, created a very, very thick bed of spruce and fir for night 1. And that really helped them to maintain core body temperature. Jeff had given Hugh some of his clothing. And so on Sunday morning, they had gotten up and started to make their way down the Gulf, started picking up trailblazes. And they arrive on Sunday morning at Great Gulf, Madison Gulf Trail Junction.
Yeah. And all things considered, they are actually doing okay.
They're self-rescuing. Yeah. They're doing the work to get out. They didn't think there would even be a rescue effort or search effort underway. Yeah. They were just like, we ended up here. We're going to get out of here.
Yeah. And it seemed like they each had their moments where they would lead the other one. So there was a back and forth, I think, of like one of them would feel better and take the lead and stay positive, and when another one was down. So they went back and forth quite a bit, I think.
Yeah. Hugh did a lot of the busting. Probably the lion's share of it.
And there's no food intake, no water intake.
No water, no food.
So what's the hypothermia situation at the moment?
Well, right now, as we're sitting here talking, you would think they're becoming hypothermic, but what's really happening is it's frostbite. Hugh is having great difficulty. They took their boots off on Saturday night. They had a really hard time getting them back on Sunday morning. They took their boots off again on Sunday, and it created a real problem for them. And so it was less about it. It was less of a hypothermia scenario. It was much more so a frostbite situation for both of them.
Yeah, and I think you cover a little bit about this medically, but based on what you've read about this and what you've seen, if someone's face was this situation, like you just kind of got to keep your boots on.
You keep your boots on.
Yeah.
Yep, because you can at least still walk.
Yeah. The damage is already done one way or the other, so it's not going to...
And that was Gordon Giesbrecht, who I think I've talked to for all 3 books because he's a cold weather expert. And he likens it to, when you get, if you're playing hockey and you get a puck hits your skate, if you take your skate off, your foot's going to blow up. So you just keep it on and keep going. So, and that's why hockey players are among the toughest athletes out there, right?
Yeah, and the craziest.
I would agree.
Yeah, the craziest too. And then the wind chill, we're talking like minus 30 wind chill over the course of those couple of days.
Wind chill was not really a factor for Hugh and Jeff because they were far enough below tree line. But what I was able to do with the Mount Washington Observatory was to work with a meteorologist to calculate, because obviously there were no mesonettes back then, and certainly not any in Great Gulf, even I think today. But they were able to help me calculate a certain amount of sky cover and drop in elevation, that this is what the temperature rises as the lower down the mountain you got. So I was able to work with elevation and looking at the ambient temperature at the summit of Mount Washington and doing the math to get a basic idea of what the temperature was in Great Gulf. But they were out of the wind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in Odell's, there's one picture in the book where the film froze because it was like minus 70.
Yeah. On the Monday search, the film froze solid. Yep.
Jeez, that's hardcore. What that's going to do to your skin within 30 seconds to a minute.
So Sunday night, the rescue team struck out. You do have a couple of hikers that are heading in the right direction to intersect with Jeff and Hugh, but nobody is thinking in terms of the Great Gulf at this point. Everybody's. I'm assuming that the mindset of the rescue team is that they're likely in Huntington. Maybe there was a fall, maybe there was an avalanche, and that this is probably leading into the direction of a recovery at that point.
Yeah, that's where it's headed, the mindset.
Yeah. And then Sunday night, what's the decision as far as what they're going to do the next day?
So Sunday night, before the teams depart, they make a decision that they're going to put Mountain Rescue Service in the gullies in the morning. They basically, I think they didn't send anybody else out on Sunday. The whole focus was, we'll have some people go into Raymond if we can to just check around Raymond. They felt they had cleared Lionhead the day before, but they were going to cover Odell, South Gully, Odell left and right, because there's two separate, the ice flows separate. Yep. South Gully, and then the also some visual searching of the escape hatch.
Okay.
And Jeff and Hugh were there at the second bivvy site for 2 nights, correct?
Right.
2 nights.
Yeah. So on Sunday, they made an effort to get out. That is the day that they headed to Madison Hut because they thought that's what they knew.
Well, they actually found the signs.
Yeah, they got to the signs
with the mileage.
They thought that Pinkham was too far away at 4 miles. They knew of Madison Hut, and that would being a 2.4 mile, but they had no idea
what they were getting
into, but that's the direction they headed in.
Yeah. And this is where the difference between being a world-class, prodigy climber and then the local knowledge of hiking comes into play, is that, if they had more local knowledge, they would know, like, okay, my better play is to go down the Great Gulf, or even better to go up Madison Gulf and connect with Old Jackson. But without the map or without that knowledge, it's tough to know.
How early did the AMC guides go back?
Well, for this I used the 1979 guide, thanks to Gandalf of the Whites, Steve Smith.
Go. Because my point is, like, if you did your research and had your maps, you could have seen perhaps some of the elevation gain.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is I'm looking at your maps now, and it is a different time because there are trails that aren't there anymore that were there in 1982.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I think that's the part of the book where people will read and go like, oh, how could they? But
yeah,
it's
they didn't know.
Yeah.
They were making decisions based on distance and what they thought they knew for a landmark.
Yeah, which we talk about this all the time around, like, the contour lines a lot of times matter more than distance when you're talking about hiking.
But that was their Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, and that's essentially, they burned all their matches on that.
That was it.
For sure.
1.7 miles in several hours.
Yes.
Yeah, in deep snow.
Yep.
In the state they were in, going on 3 days.
Yeah, I mean, the climbing section of Madison Gulf is like brutal in the summer. I can only imagine what it was like in the winter.
Yeah.
So exposed.
Yeah. But they were able to make their way down. The positive part about this is that they're laying tracks in areas that people will eventually arrive in.
Right.
Which is a good thing.
So they bivvy again Sunday night at the same boulder. So Sunday night they bivvy at a new boulder. and they'll be there Monday night as well. But I think where we had gone was, what's going to happen Monday.
Yeah, yeah. And Monday they start spreading out the search a little bit wider.
Yeah, Monday's focus really is on the gullies, technical climbs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the teams all meet, and at that point, like, it's very easy for the rescuers to say, like, yeah, this is a recovery and I'm not going, but that's not really how the mountain rescue service teams members worked. And Albert in particular was committed. He was going again.
Yeah, and I think they. They weren't really, there were some that were thinking the worst had happened. They knew there were instances where, climbers had ended up in Raymond in the woods, not far from Harvard Cabin. Could they have dug a snow cave? Were they bivouacking? They didn't know. So they were just, and again, these are young guys, and there was just a really strong desire to obviously find them. They sent teams into the ravine that Monday morning.
Yeah, and then so Albert was paired up with
Michael Hartrick.
And you got a chance to talk with Michael?
I did. Yep. Yeah, I did.
How was his? Was it tough to get him to talk, or was he pretty open?
So the one thing I want to mention is, and again, Saturday night the wind shifts, eastern aspects are loading with snow. Sunday, strong westerly winds, more snowfall. Loading. Sunday night, loading overnight. So, there was concern about avalanche hazard for sure. But back to Michael, I was able to get in contact with Michael through a member of Mountain Rescue Service who had known him. It's a member of MRS that I have gotten to know through all of these projects. And Michael was, I couldn't have asked for more from him. We sat down on 2 occasions, and he was just really forthcoming and open. And he said, and he told me, he says, no one's ever really talked to me about this before. It happened, and back then, things happen. What do? You go inward, and he hadn't really had these kinds of conversations. So
yeah, when he looked back at that time, so they were sent in to climb what section of Huntington?
So Michael and Albert had Odell right.
Okay.
And then Steve Larson and Doug Madera had Odell left. Joe Lentini and Tiger Burns had South Gully.
Can they, when they're climbing up in that environment, like, I feel like the weather cleared a little bit, but can they actually, are you close enough where you can just see each other going up?
They could see each other for a while, and then it does separate. So they did lose some visual contact with each other.
Who was going up Lionhead?
Nobody is going up.
No team going up Lionhead?
No one's that, because they had gone up on Sunday.
Okay. So cleared it, essentially.
Yep, they felt they cleared it. Yep.
They cleared it. So basically they sent 3 teams, 2 climbers each, to go up to those climbing routes that they hadn't fully cleared.
Right.
So, and no sign of the climbers, so they made their way up. Was Albert leading, or was Michael leading?
I believe Michael was leading. And, why are they checking South Gully? Well, if you top out on Odell's and you go left, you might descend South Gully instead of Escape Hatch in bad weather. So, they wanted to clear all of the kind of the chutes, the gullies to the left of Odell.
And then as they're doing this, there's activity at Pinkham Notch. So obviously everybody's aware that there's an active search going on. It's carried on for 2-3 days now. So what are some of the people that are working at Pinkham doing at this time?
So I think what you're seeing is just the Forest Service and the AMC working together on search management. The media is starting to pick up on this a little bit. But also, life is going on at the lodge. There's still winter recreators that are around. The weather's pretty bad, so it's a little bit quieter, but there's definitely people that have come in for the weekend, because the weekends were obviously the busiest time for Pinkham.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so as the climb's going on at Huntington, they're clearing it. They top out. Did the teams wait to connect with each other, or they're just working independently? So
let's start at South Gully. Joe Lentini and Tiger Burns started to get up into South Wind Slab. Joe, who had been in an avalanche before when he was 19 years old, he was not comfortable. They were digging some test pits here and there, just a big slab hanging there. And he's like, we're just not doing this. And they backed off and went back down to the floor of the ravine to reconvene at the Thiokol, because there were also some teams in snow caves in the ravine just on standby in case they found Hugh or Jeff, or members of the team got in trouble that were climbing. They just wanted to have that contingency plan. And then Doug Madera and Steve Larson, who had done Odell Left, they had essentially topped out on Odell Left, and they wrapped down. Albert and Michael topped out on the ice bulge on Odell Right, and then it just becomes a pretty steep snow climb. And I think, this is where I think Michael's story is just, it's heavy, it's powerful. Michael did not like to rappel, especially off of ice or snow. And so they had topped out on the bulge. They still had a snow climb above, but they were thinking, okay, we're going to wrap back down. It doesn't look like there's been anyone up here. We don't see anybody. And there was that significant discomfort with rappelling. So they mutually decide they're going to continue the snow climb up. As they're doing that, they start to pick up, they see a carabiner in the rock to their left. They move over to it. There's footprints. This is the first sign that somebody has been there at some point, and these footprints now track away from the carabiner up toward the top of the gully. So obviously, this is the first evidence.
They're going to chase that down.
They're going to chase it, and that's what they did.
Yeah. So they end up topping out, but obviously they get up there, and there's at some point they lose the trail. I'm assuming
it's windblown, right?
Yeah. They get up, they top out, and the tracks continue across the garden, and they follow them for a period of time. They get onto the garden, and they lose the tracks. So at this point, they start to contour Raymond Cataract, which, they're taking a more of a direct line rather than following the trail, to not only to look down into Raymond, but also to bring them onto the Lionhead feature.
Got it. And then they make their way over to Lionhead.
What's going on with the families? Have they been notified yet?
No. So, word's getting around Mount Washington Valley because you had EMS and IME guides, climbers who are now out on a multi-day search. So there's talk in town that there's 2 climbers missing. MRS is up there with AMC and the Forest Service and Fish and Game. Albert's family had no idea he was out on a search. His fiance, who he lived with, knew, but in terms of his sisters or his parents, they didn't know. Yeah. And again, that wasn't an uncommon thing. Mm-hmm. That's just, he didn't live at home and lived out on his own, and not necessarily just going to pick up the phone and call your parents and say, hey, here's what I'm doing,
right?
When you're 28. So,
but what about Jeff and Hugh?
So Jeff and Hugh's parents, they are alerted on Sunday.
Okay, so it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah.
3 days in.
Yep.
Okay.
So they go missing Saturday. Parents get alerted on Sunday. Hugh's parents elect, they're kind of, the parents are told, why don't you hold tight? We're going to be sending out a team on Monday. And if we don't find anything on Monday, maybe, potentially have you come up. Well, Jeff and Hugh's parents, they stayed put. And I think Hugh's parents got here Tuesday. Jeff's parents got here, I think, on Monday.
Okay.
Or in the early morning hours of Tuesday morning.
Whew, hardcore. That's a terrible situation.
Yeah, I
to be in.
I just can't imagine getting that call, being hundreds of miles away and having to try to get here.
Yeah. And think through, and then like what's going through your head when you're driving all the way up here.
Yeah.
Like, oh geez, I'm wasting, it could be like, oh, they're perfectly fine and I'm going to get up there and find out that I drove 300 miles for no reason. So,
yeah.
Yeah, it's tough, but just going back to, so Michael and Albert are up top. They make their way. They do find some prints, but eventually they decide they're going to go down the Lion's Head, which is the sort of the fateful decision.
Right.
Yeah.
So they start, and again, it's really bad weather, poor visibility. They had experienced high winds on the garden, as you might imagine. They'd been out all day, and they just wanted to get down off the mountain, and so they start their descent, and they get disoriented. Essentially, they can't find the winter route. They had actually come in higher up on near the top of the summer route, which is avalanche prone, and they were radioed to say get onto the winter route because slab, they could see some storm slab and wind slab.
And you had said that this area had been loading up significantly.
It had. And so they shifted course. They're traversing really the upper slopes. They're trying to find the winter route, and Michael knew that a team had gone up Lionhead the day before, and he's looking for the trough. Well, the trough got covered over, so they continued to move in the direction of what they thought was the winter route, which at the time was, if you're looking up at the summer route, the winter route was to the left. It's now positioned to the right. Okay. So they're just continuing to move to the, in the direction, also knowing that eventually, that area is going to narrow because you're going to be coming into Tuckerman. They stop for lunch, not lunch, but to have something to eat, just take a little bit of a break, and they continue to move toward hermit shelters because they're kind of making a beeline, knowing they're eventually going to arrive there.
And that area is typically not there's not as much avalanche concern with Lionhead as the winter route typically, right?
Yeah. There was a big avalanche on Lionhead in 1969. 5 million pounds of snow slid there.
Wow.
And the team that was on Lionhead on Sunday, the AMC team, the leader of that group did experience some snow instability, reported it. But this was not known as an area where there was avalanche activity. The focus was it happened in the ravines, Tuckerman's. It would happen in Huntington, but Lionhead was not really a factor.
Yeah. So they're making their way down, and an avalanche was triggered.
Yeah. So they are crossing. They're on a 30 to 35 degree slope. There's a kind of a little chute that drops down below there's a cliff band there. And they were in the midst of crossing the snow slope when this large slab breaks off. But
it was immersed within trees somewhat and vegetation, which is unusual, or maybe not.
They had been through heavy vegetation. It opens up a little bit into a clearing where the chute is, but it's in a glade of birch trees. Right.
Which you generally think is probably going to be safe. I mean, reading this has totally changed my opinion of avalanche danger and, bushwhacking, backcountry. You always tend to think you're safe if you're in the trees.
Yeah. It's not, they can be an anchor, but they've got to be within a certain distance of each other. And what we know now, because of the advancements in snow science, is that birch glades are a sign of regrowth, meaning that something took down the vegetation there previously. And we didn't know that back then.
They may not be dense enough to hold the snow back.
Right.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the avalanche did result in Albert dying, and it was basically the rescue shifted from a focus on Jeff and Hugh to now they've got their own team member that they've got to find, and they didn't know at the time, but they had to activate a rescue for Michael and Albert.
Yeah, the team, they had wrapped up for the day. They were the climbers in Huntington, the ones that were kind of standing by in snow caves or at the floor, they were hiking down to Pinkham or had already hiked down and arrived there. The Thiokol had stopped at Harvard Cabin, and then they were making their way over Mountain Rescue Service and the two snow rangers operating the Thiokol, and they were heading to Lionhead to meet Albert and Michael on their descent, and there was a light mood in the Thiokol for the most part, that they had dodged a bullet, that they knew they were on the edge, they knew that this was risky and hazardous, and that they felt like they had kind of gotten past that. Their work was essentially over for the search because they had cleared the technical terrain. And this was either going to become an air search or just getting word out to people going out into the backcountry if you come across the two missing climbers, or look for signs that they've been somewhere. It was for them, it was in the wind down stage for sure.
Yeah, and relatively speaking, the Harvard cabin and that particular, it's not far at all from where they were when you look at it on a map, but it can be difficult terrain to maneuver to. So they've now got to basically get the word out that there's been an accident, and they've got to get a crew of people up there looking for help. Yeah,
definitely the level of urgency when Michael was able to get to his radio, because he got caught as well, and he radioed avalanche, and you can imagine the adrenaline dump in the Thiokol, the sense of urgency to get over there. There were people at Pinkham that heard the radio call that grabbed shovels and anything they could get their hands on and started running up Tuckerman Ravine Trail. And they, two people had arrived there pretty quickly afterward, and one was able to find Michael, Joe Gill, who was the Tuckerman's caretaker, and was able to just provide enough reassurance to let him know, hey, help's on the way. I've got to go look for Albert, because Albert wasn't visible. Yep. And then over the course of, it was an hour, roughly, they had dug Michael out, walked him down to the caretaker cabin to take care of him, and then within that hour, they had located Albert, who had essentially, he was killed instantly in the avalanche.
Yeah, which is this is the first and only time that a rescuer's been killed.
Yep.
Yeah. So obviously this changes from the rescue teams are all very concerned about Hugh and Jeff, but at this point, like the situation completely changes.
Yeah, I mean the trauma.
Yeah.
In that moment for them, and to have to, obviously recover him, bring him down the mountain, get him into an ambulance, where he's taken to the hospital and pronounced dead, trying to get word to his loved ones, to his family. Word is starting to spread that something's gone wrong. No one really down in the valley knows who that is. And it's just this really brutal, traumatic period.
Yeah. And the information moves so much slower than it does today. Yeah. So it's just, that's one thing that stands out when you read the book, is logistically getting the message out. I mean, his family didn't even know that he was out there on the search. And then, you've still got behind the scenes, you've got people that are dealing with, like, where are Jeff and Hugh? So that's still going on. But can you talk a little bit about the mindset of where the team is, the search and rescue team members are at in the day or two after this happens?
Well, I think it's mixed. There's obviously shock, devastation, grief. There's some anger, which these are all normal emotions with something like this. And but they had decided as a team that they had done all they could do. They had cleared the technical routes, that if something emerged on Tuesday, because this happened on Monday afternoon, that if something happened, obviously to call them and they would respond. And there were rescuers that were at the site of the avalanche that, they were ready to go the next day if they were needed. There was a decision made that they were not needed because it was going to shift to an air search, but they would be on standby if needed. And then it was just, a couple of days of just being together, some isolated. But one thing that they did that was really, and there were no critical incident stress debriefing services back then.
That wasn't even a concept.
It just wasn't. Yeah. It's men, and what do? This thing happens. You don't show vulnerability. You kind of just turn inward and bury it. But they did something that I thought was really, really critical in this process. And within a couple of nights, they convened the team, and they got together, and what we would call that today is a diffusing. That type of activity happens today. Traumatic event, get the team together, you're trying to get the lid off the pot. They leave. This is what you might experience. This is what you might expect. This is what you should do, not do. And then they have them back a day or two later for a debriefing. So there's diffusing, debriefing, but the team got together and essentially diffused. They got it out on the table. There were mixed views on what had happened and why they were out there, and talk about whether the team should even continue on at all, that it wasn't worth the risk. And they made a decision. A veteran of the team, who was a former British SAS trooper, got up and said, "Albert, this is not what Albert would want. Albert would want us to keep going, to continue." And that night they made a collective decision that we're going to keep going, we're going to get better.
Yeah. And I think that just inherently all the team members, I mean, selflessness is a theme that comes through, because just the idea that they're out there in those dangerous conditions, that they certainly could be doing many other things with their time and effort. And Albert, made the effort to be there for every day that he could. So it's probably without question that he would have taken that perspective. But I understand people can be mad and say, like, look, we shouldn't have, we shouldn't have gone up in those conditions, or maybe they should have forced them to say, like, hey, you've got to rappel down. Who knows what the other options are? I don't really know enough about climbing to know for sure, but it's got to be a very difficult thing to not second guess what it could have been. As far as like the decisions to avoid what happened.
Right. And they really focused on learning from there. I think within 6 months, they knew they needed to be in a position to help people. There were only a couple of folks at the site of the avalanche that had medical training, and they wanted to expand that. They bought technology for avalanche transceivers. They got training in how to use avalanche probes, because up until that point, they had not probed for an avalanche victim before, and now they were probing for a teammate. And they started to bring in outside expertise and develop expertise within the team around technical rescue, because there was a lot that they could learn just with the use of litters and rope and high angle rescue, and they just continued to get better and better and better. And the snow science, the knowledge around and expertise around snow science was improving at the same time.
Yeah, and there was a law passed, I think, specifically as a result of this, which previously there was no medical coverage for rescue team members. And I remember when I interviewed Doug Teschner about he was involved in a rescue of a hiker and also a fatality, Kenneth Hawkinson, the year later. And I think he had said that he was like one of the first people that was actually covered under that new law, where the state would fund any medical expenses.
Yeah, the state senator out of Center Sandwich sponsored a bill to get volunteer search and rescue personnel working under the authority of New Hampshire Fish and Game workers' comp insurance. The federal government followed soon after that when they're operating in the Cutler River drainage under oversight for the Forest Service. So now today, there's workers' comp coverage for volunteers, both at the state or federal level, depending on what organization has oversight. And there's also a federal and state death benefit as well.
Okay. Yeah. So it is good to see that people reacted a little bit
and very quickly, because in the years leading up to this, there had been talk at the state level about providing some type of coverage for them, but it just didn't get any traction. It didn't go anywhere. But as with a lot of things, you have that watershed moment that almost forces the discussion back onto the table, and they took, the legislature took a leadership role and get the coverage in place.
Yeah. Yeah. And, obviously tragic, and the positive out of this is that people did learn some lessons. And, I think that the understanding of how to process grief and these challenges within search and rescue teams has gotten a lot better, like you said. But
I had a question about that, actually, in terms of the changes with the teams. Culturally, from then till now, have you noticed a shift in terms of the willingness of teams or team leadership to send rescuers into certain situations that may place them at risk and tragic situations?
Yeah, I want to use an example from the first book, because I talked about this Tuesday night at Gibson's, because I think all the things I've written about kind of link back to 1982 when you think about it. But on Sunday night of the search for Kate Matrasova, Mountain Rescue Service, New Hampshire Fish and Game deployed a hasty team up Appalachia. Mountain Rescue Service followed. The beacon coordinate at that point was showing on the west face of Madison, which we ultimately know was incorrect. But they thought Kate had been moving and had gotten below tree line. And so the Mountain Rescue Service team dropped down into that, I don't know what to call it, between Appalachia and
Valleyway?
Valleyway Trail.
King Ravine, that whole area.
It wasn't King, but it was on the face of Madison. But they dropped down into, again, you're talking waist and chest deep snow, headed up the slope, got to tree line, and didn't go above tree line. What you saw there was restraint. Even though they were about a half a mile from the coordinate, you saw restraint. And I think that restraint goes back to the changes that followed Albert's loss, because then the culture became, we're not going to put rescuers' lives in jeopardy on these missions. Now, that's not to say there isn't risk on the missions, but there is a mindset with search management and team leaders that, we're not going to.
You're not going to create another rescue situation.
Yeah, I can attest to that. That's definitely a larger part of the mission mindset these days.
Yep.
Yeah. Just to shift back to what's happening. So you have this tragic event. You have Jeff and Hugh bivvied down Sunday into Monday. Did you get to talk to them about religious aspects? Or I know that Jeff was somewhat religious.
Yeah.
Was that a big part of his survival? And
it was,
because Sunday into Monday, I think that's when you start to see them breaking.
Yes. So I think after I think the break started, and Hugh from Saturday afternoon, starting Saturday afternoon, Hugh did not believe they were going to live as they're making their way down into Great Gulf, but he's not sharing that with Jeff, because Jeff is he's full of optimism the whole time. Hugh's more, he's just thoughtful, just keeping these thoughts to himself, rationally, like really not thinking they were going to survive this. I think what the beginning of the break started when they had made that effort to get to Madison Hut and couldn't, and ended up back where they started several hours later. And that's where you start to see this, they're not giving up yet, but it's just becoming the reality of the situation setting in. My sense with Hugh and Jeff is Jeff deeply religious, but would tell you that at that time in 82, climbing trumped faith. Hugh, incredibly spiritual, like meditative, getting into the zone, that flow state, that kind, so it was they were spiritual, but just in a little bit, it was just in different ways.
Yeah, so there's we talk about sort of the culture of Pinkham Notch. So Kim is the cook at Pinkham Notch.
She was on Night Watch.
A Night Watch, okay.
Did some work. They would
work in the
always
kitchen.
do different things. Just AMC staff would go where the needs were.
Yeah.
At any given point. But what you had the two backpackers who had now gotten onto Old Jackson, stayed on Old Jackson on Monday night, and then. No, I'm sorry. I'm going to make sure I get this right. Yep, Monday night, near Lowe's Bald Spot. On Tuesday morning, Cam Bradshaw just wants to get out of camp. And essentially, the mountain had been shut down. People were just told, do not go out because we're going to have a Huey helicopter up, and we just don't want to give false positives with people out recreating. So,
and she strikes me as like just a badass hiker. Like she's just getting out, and like her obvious route for her to avoid everything is to go up Old Jackson, go into the Great Gulf, and she figures like I'm not going to see anything.
Yeah, and this is a person that wanted to be alone. Liked being alone, solitary person, very well acclimated in the mountains. Spent a ton of time out there, backpacking, camping. And so she starts to make her way, wants to get out of camp, makes her way out Old Jackson. She's going to do kind of this loop where she connects with Madison Gulf Trail, gets on the Osgood Cutoff. It's going to bring her back around. The Osgood Cutoff's not there anymore, but drop her back onto the auto road, hike the auto road back up to Old Jackson and go back to work her night shift, essentially.
That's great.
Crosses the auto road. And gets on to Madison Gulf Trail, encounters the two backpackers, Jeff May and Dave Boudreau, who are again moving just super slow,
living their best life,
sleeping in, just doing their thing. Just a brief interaction with Cam as she goes by, and not long after that, Cam starts to see these footprints, in post holing in the snow.
Another religious reference.
Yeah. And just
footprints in the snow.
Footprints in the snow. And starts to follow them. They're erratic. And these are the footprints that were made by Jeff Batzer as he tried to make another attempt to get out.
That's right. So they had burned all their matches going up Madison Gulf. They were camped out in between Madison Gulf and like where Osgood Cutoff is. There's a couple of like wooden bridges that were still there, and they were aware of those bridges, but and there was trail signs, so they were in civilization from that perspective, but they burned all their matches and couldn't go. But Jeff had made sort of a half, he had attempted but didn't make it very far.
Yeah, with one boot.
Yeah,
wearing one boot.
So.
He had tried to get out. He's like, okay, I'm gonna go for Glen House, and which is it's a good call.
Yeah,
but just got disoriented. The winds had picked up in the Gulf by that time, and he just essentially got driven back to their bivouac site. But Cam picks this up. He's following the tracks. It brings her into that trail junction. She's looking around. She sees the tracks heading up Great Gulf Trail, but she thinks that that she's starting to get a sense might this be the missing climbers, but thinks that the tracks are heading up Great Gulf Trail, doesn't realize that they actually drop off the trail and down the riverbank to this boulder
and
where they are.
That section it's a bit of a maze because you've got Madison Gulf that heads up to Adams. Then you've got the Great Gulf that travels along the Peabody River, and then you've also got the cutover to get up to, I think Chandler. I got to look at the map again here, but yeah, it's a bit of a maze in there.
Yeah.
It is. But she was wearing snowshoes, so she must have noticed that these are post holes.
Yeah, and they were going off trail and over blowdowns, under blowdowns, and you just tell that she initially thought it was a moose, and then she started to think, okay, this might be something. Crosses the bridge over the Peabody, starts up Madison Gulf Trail following the tracks, which was the tracks that they laid on Sunday. Comes back down. She thought she was going to find them deceased at the end of the tracks up on Madison Gulf. So that's just how she thought this would end. Stood on the bridge for a bit, and then that's when contact was made with Jeff and Cam verbally, and Cam went over, descended the embankment, and there she found Hugh and Jeff.
Yeah, which must have blown her mind.
Yep.
Really, yeah.
It did.
Did you talk to her?
Through email.
Through email.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
She's still solitary.
Yes. Yeah. And I have nothing but respect, and I'm so thankful for what I was able to get for information from her. For sure.
Her adrenaline must have been going crazy.
Yeah.
Well,
so,
look at what she did after.
Yeah.
So she gives them some food, gives them some clothing, some fluids, and she said, "I'm all right. I'm going to head out for help." And she beelines Madison Gulf Trail toward the auto road, and she encounters the backpackers, who by this time have broken down camp, and they're making their way into the Gulf. And she tells them what she's found. They didn't make the connection. What missing climbers? So they start to make their way into the Gulf. Cam comes out onto the auto road, miraculously encounters two people, AMC staffers skiing down the auto road. Those AMC staffers ski down to Glen House site, flag down a car. It took some time. Get a ride to Pinkham, alert Pinkham. Cam gets to Glen House site, calls Pinkham. The two backpackers arrive at Great Gulf and start treating Jeff and Hugh.
Yeah, and they've got the gear, which is
they have a lot of gear.
Fortunate.
Yeah,
Probably saved their skin.
Yes, yeah, for sure. So, hats off to the heavy hikers.
Yeah,
That's right.
And Cam for sure.
Yeah,
Yes.
wow. But even then, at that point, like, it's not guaranteed that they're going to survive. Like, they're at the bottom of where they're going to be.
Yeah, and much more so. Hugh is, Jeff is ambulatory to a certain extent. Hugh is not. Yeah. Hugh's down. Had been down. Monday, Tuesday. I mean, he just had frostbite was really pervasive with him. But that's then, and the Huey helicopter had already been searching that day. They were at Pinkham, getting ready to head back to Concord to come back the following day, potentially, when Pinkham is alerted about this, and then that rescue effort begins.
Yeah, and it gets tricky because this is not an area that's friendly for helicopters.
Nope, not at all.
So you've got a little bit of windows where you've got the bridges and you've got the river crossings, but those are not areas where you want to play around with helicopter lifts.
Right.
So, but they did anyway.
Yeah, they got this done. It was remarkable.
Well, wasn't Misha with them?
Misha loaded into the the helicopter, and which was huge because he was a dust-off medic. He had experience in helicopters and rescue, battlefield rescue. But he was lowered down with the crew chief from the Huey, and Misha went over, immediately started treating Hugh. The backpackers helped get Jeff over to this small knoll for them to get him up on the Huey. They had to go back and refuel, and they came back and they were able to get Hugh.
So they took out Jeff by jungle penetrator.
And then Hugh by litter. So they couldn't. They couldn't cross the river with Hugh with the litter. It's just impossible because the bridge was just completely snow covered, snow clogged. So they had to do it on the riverbed essentially.
And this is why I always say that this is a Spielberg movie, because there's so many hiccups. Like an action adventure movie, to read it is incredible. That they overcame so many problems.
Yeah, and they keep solving problems. They just kept solving problems.
Like one after another.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
So definitely not recommended to try to play around with a litter in that area. They had very narrow window in the trees.
They were going to have to carry that litter, and there were not many of them there.
He probably wouldn't have survived if they had to carry him.
They wouldn't have. He would not have. Probably wouldn't have survived to carry out. Yeah. Although if they could have gotten him to a thiokol, but it's so hard to know.
Yeah. Because it's not that far really to get out to the auto road, but it's still, you're talking like
it's like a mile,
a couple of hours maybe.
It's going to take a long time.
Yeah. So
I can't say he wouldn't have survived, but it's just,
it wouldn't have been good.
Yeah.
So they quickly make their way to the hospital, and they're treated. You said 94 degrees was their body temp?
Yeah, their core temp was 94, which is shocking.
What's do you know what like the lowest survival is? Is it like people been to like 90 degrees?
So I read an article about a woman who was submerged at 56 degrees.
Oh, wow.
James Osborne was 76 degrees.
Okay, that's true, yeah. So,
and, here's the thing, one of the rescuers in 1982 was on the team that found James and helped save him.
Wow.
With the Blackhawks. So you just see this amazing and that was a history-making rescue in and of itself. You just see this incredible progression over time of search and rescue capability.
Yeah. It's insane. And then the so after Jeff and Hugh are picked up, then you've got the two hikers. They're still there. Their adrenaline through the roof. So everybody's heading back to Pinkham Notch, I'm assuming.
Yeah, they hike out. Hike out. They couldn't get Misha on the helicopter because of a fuel issue.
Yeah.
That's when they went back, and they went back to Pinkham to refuel before they went to Littleton. But they hiked out, and then they took the Thiokol down, got back to Pinkham.
Yeah. Wow.
And Littleton is it still considered the go-to for hypothermic victims?
I think other
Littleton
hospitals.
Regional Hospital.
Right. It was renowned. And Dr. Harry McDade, Campbell McLaren.
Right.
Campbell McLaren treated Hugh, Herr.
I met him once.
And Campbell McLaren treated James Osborne.
Okay.
I mean, these are the in 2008. It's just,
wow.
Yeah.
These are the crazy connections in this story.
A moment of silence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really amazing.
Yeah. So you've got, and obviously it's the highest of highs and the lowest of lows.
Yeah.
Over the course of, 4 days, 5 days. And then the aftermath of this obviously is that, there, a lot of sadness over Albert. The family's got to process. The family's got to manage through the funeral and then the memorials and everything. When you hike into Huntington Ravine, you will you'll come upon if you avoid Harvard Cabin, you'll come upon a little cache area, and there's a memorial there for Albert that they put there. So I think a lot of people become aware of it if they've hiked into that area.
Yeah, and that cache, just ironically, had been moved to where it is today. It was higher up in the ravine, but it was the Dow cache was destroyed by an avalanche and had to be relocated. So
So
what are the odds? That's strange.
I know, right? Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So there is a memorial there that anybody basically going up in the into that area will see it. I think you miss it if you come in from the Harvard Cabin, but everybody kind of just makes their way down into the bottom of that ravine there. So. Yeah.
So the redemption arc, what have these two young climbers done with their lives since?
So they suffered the amputations due to severe frostbite. Again, they're the young, fit bodies were able to hold off the cold from a hypothermia perspective, but not frostbite. Jeff would go on to he would. I'll leave it for people reading the book, but he had a religious moment in the helicopter heading to Littleton Hospital. I guess we could talk about it for a minute if you want, but
we gotta leave something for him.
Yeah, right.
But you people better still buy this book.
Yeah, he did. He devoted himself to his faith, and he went. He became a pastor. He went on multiple missions. And doing missionary work. And Hugh came back into Mount Washington Valley. He wanted to come back to the valley and confront that part of his life, and resumed climbing. Started climbing with the Mount Washington climbing community, some of whom were people that were out looking for him. Mm-hmm. And then went on to university. And today he is... he's the director of the media lab at MIT, and he is world renowned for the work that he is doing with prosthetics. It's an amazing story.
Incredible
what he's doing. Yeah.
Wow. twists, huh?
Quite a
The
story.
things that happen in your life.
So, let me ask you this.
guide
So,
you.
Yeah.
as you were pulling on all these threads, are there any other threads that you've pulled on where you're like, that might be my next project?
There are definitely some things that I learned in the research process that I'm compelled by and we'll explore for sure.
So you're not done writing?
No.
Okay.
No.
You gonna take a break, or are you always jotting?
Well, no. I think right now it's the response to the book, and right now I'm focused on supporting independent bookstores and being present at the ones that want me to be there to do some signings. And then after the first of the year, I'll start to schedule and have started scheduling talks, book talks.
Yeah.
But I think I don't want to let the writing, I don't want a long lag between.
It's a muscle, isn't it?
It is. And I think I learned that in between Where You'll Find Me in Last Traverse and Last Traverse in this one. Yeah.
Too much of a break.
Yeah, I think just too much lag. Just I don't want to lose that.
But this must be tiring and draining to you emotionally. You're living this story for 2-3 years plus. These books for 8 years. I mean, there has to be some toll on you.
Yeah. So I think the first 2 books I was able to keep at arm's length in a way. I always went into these saying, when I would sit with families, what they are going through is, I'm going to be okay. Like, I might be tired or burnt out or whatever it might be, but I'm not going to make this about me. And they went through a really, really difficult thing. With this book in particular, I have gotten to know a lot of these folks in the search and rescue community over the past eight years or so. And when you're talking with them about the loss of a teammate, a line of duty death, Albert's sisters, and I was dealing with my own personal issues during that, where in the midst of writing, my dad's health declined, and over a 9-month period declined to the point where, he passed away last October. I think I shared this at the
I got to meet your dad once.
Yeah. And
nice guy.
It was really hard to write about grief and loss as I'm going through grief and loss.
Translates into your writing. It has to bleed into your writing.
It totally does. And there were some really emotional conversations with family members, with teammates. So there was that, and then my father's illness and loss. And then at that point, I was coming into the writing of what happened Monday. So I will just say that this definitely took a toll for sure. Yep.
Well, the final product the final book is amazing, and it's definitely a book where you're not going to put it down when you start reading it. So I find that this time frame in the early 80s pretty fascinating. And honestly, there was a lot of fatalities going on in that area, unfortunately. But I think it was a time where people were learning. And I think back to like that metric that I showed on at Reckless, where you look at the average age of the fatalities, how it's gone up. It used to be young men would get in trouble, but I think the equipment and the knowledge and the access to information has limited those issues.
Yeah,
now.
And the gear has gotten a lot better. And I think I use the word toll, but I'm really grateful for it. I'm really grateful for this whole experience and the honor of being able to write this story this way. Yes, I made sacrifices, but nowhere near the sacrifice that Albert and his family and his teammates, Michael Hartrick, made. So it was really, really hard, but it was all for good. Yeah.
Is there anybody else that we didn't talk about that stood out to you?
I mean, I think they all had their stories. I mean, I don't know if you remember Jeff Tyree, who had the avalanche in King Ravine.
Yep.
And in I think it was
Yeah, that's
1980,
right. Yep.
and Albert was on that rescue. Jeff, I talked to him over the phone, but he drove from the north the other night, he came to the Gibson's event, and I was able to meet him, and he was able to connect with Albert's sister. There's so many side stories in there. David Shoemaker, who perished in Odell in 1979, talking to his mother, who's in her 90s, and all of it's special.
Yeah.
All of it. I can come up every interaction. There's a gift within all of them.
Yeah, well, it's an amazing book. So for listeners, if you are interested, they can actually purchase a signed copy through fullconditionsnh.com, right? Yeah,
they can. There'll be some signed copies at book independent. You can buy one through me, but I'm all independent bookstores are just so supportive of authors, particularly local authors. So, and I'll be doing some signings here and there. If you go on my Instagram feed, I've been posting where I'm going to be. So, yep.
Yeah. And we'll get the link to where people can purchase it. And if there's a list of like independent bookstores, we can certainly add that to our show notes too.
Great.
Yeah, I keep on looking at the New York Times bestseller list to see where you are.
I don't think it's not going to happen. It's not going to.
No.
It's not going to happen.
It's our little corner of New Hampshire stomp.
Yeah, and
Calm down.
And I. But here's what
I'm looking anyway.
But I know the bookstores are. I know it's doing very well in the local bookstores, and I'm really that's
100%.
What brings me joy is how they're doing and how that story is moving out of the stores and into people's hands and the story is becoming kind of fully known.
Who are the people showing up for your talks?
It's
because it seems like it's so big now.
Yeah, it's
like 300 people. Many turned away.
Yeah.
Who are they? Are they New England?
There was a really diverse group the other night.
Kids?
There were kids. There were older folks there. There were non-hikers, non-climbers. There were some SAR members there. It just ran the gamut, and
that's healthy though. That's great.
Yeah, because I think yes, it's a mountain-based story, but it transcends the mountains because a lot of this stuff happens everywhere, and the lessons move into your day-to-day life, I think, for sure.
100%. This is great. Well, we love you. Thank you.
I love you too.
We love this friendship and everything that's going on, and I feel like we're helping the search and rescue community. I really do. Don't you guys think? I hope so.
There's an appetite for this content, whether
safety. It's awareness.
Yeah, whether it's a book or a podcast or, social media, that there is a lot of people that are interested and they're thinking about hiking. The social media piece is, there's more negatives, I think, than positives there. But I think that like this book is a great read, and like I said, I couldn't put it down after I started reading it, and I think that the story is just fascinating, and there's so many different angles to this one. Even just thinking about the challenges and the risk that the helicopter pilots dealt with, the aftermath of the medical advances around cold weather injuries. Those are sort of secondary to the story, but they're still interesting on their own. So. I really loved it, and I think that it's an important story for people to learn, and I think that the history in the White Mountains to me is always fascinating.
Yeah, and I want to thank both of you for, this has been a awesome evolving friendship over time, and and now we're doing Full Conditions annually at Reckless, and it's awesome, and you were early readers, and you wrote a blurb, and I really appreciate the time you put in, not only with this work, but just in general, and collecting data and sharing stories and getting information out there. I think it all helps.
Yep. Yeah. And hopefully people can stay safe, but I do think that hiking is going to continue to be popular. So, whatever channel it is that you can get the message out for people to just start thinking about this stuff. We talked about it with the last Traverse, like sort of developing that little, message in your mind to say like, okay, well, I may be in over my head. Let me turn around.
Yeah.
That's the goal, is to get that muscle built in everybody's head, and it's not easy to do. But I think that the more we talk about it, maybe the more, even if one person gets it, it can save a life.
Yeah, and what I've been getting a lot lately is that, hey, I've changed the way I'm changing the way I go out, and the way I didn't pack before. I really pack to prepare now, and I'm like, don't give me the credit. I presented the content, you read the content, and you made a conscious decision to modify. So that, pat yourself on the shoulder. But I think if folks like us, if we're just continuing to push content out and talking about these things, people are thirsty for the knowledge, and they listen, and it's just neat to see what's happening out there.
Yeah.
With changes.
Well, we will definitely put links in the show notes on how people can buy the book, and we'll try to get a list of some of the local bookstores that are selling it. The rumor I hear is that it's tough to get it right now, but I think that the printing presses will stay busy. Well, thank you so much, Ty, and
thank you.
Hopefully we won't fall asleep driving home. It's been a long night.
Yeah.
Well, you know what I have to do? I have to release the demon cats. Daphne's going to be so glad to be out here. So she'll be keeping me up all night.
Awesome.
But thank you, Ty.
Thank you for having me.
This is wonderful.
Happy holidays to you and your listeners.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to learn more about the topics covered in today's show, please check out the show notes and safety information at SLASRPodcast.com. That's SLASR podcast.com. You can also follow the show on Facebook and Instagram. We hope you'll join us next week for another great show. Until then, on behalf of Mike and Stomp, get out there and crush some mega peaks.
Now covered in scratches, blisters, and bug bites, Chris Staff wanted to complete his most challenging day hike ever.
Fish and Game officers say the hiker from Florida activated an emergency beacon yesterday morning. He was hiking along the Appalachian Trail when the weather started to get worse. Officials say the snow was piled up to 3 feet in some spots, and there was a wind chill of -1 degree.
And there's 3 words to describe this race. Do we all know what they are? Only one Hill!
Lieutenant James Nealon, New Hampshire Fish and Game. Lieutenant, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
What are some of the most common mistakes you see people make when they're heading out on the trails to hike here in New Hampshire?
It seems to me the most common is being unprepared, and I think if they just simply visited hikesafe.com and got a list of the 10 essential items and had those in their packs, they probably would have no need to ever call us at all.